We call a Dallas workshop to order. I have a secretary call the roll, please.
Council President Schilling,
Here.
Councilor Adams,
Here.
Councilor Barrientos,
Here.
Councilor Briggs,
Here.
Councilor Collins,
Present.
Councilor Fitzgerald,
Here.
Councilor Jantz,
Here.
Councilor Verdon.
Here.
Councilor Sheen is excused.
Thank you. First thing on the agenda is the Lock Riel Node Master Plan update. Mr. City Manager.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Woods. So tonight we have with us John Lagarza. He is online, so you can see him there. Hi, John. And he will be presenting to the council regarding this project. It's been going on for some time, working with the Technical Advisory Committee and the Planning Commission and seeing the draft plan. So we're going to talk about the plan tonight and then the future steps that still need to take place. I don't know, is there anything else, Charlie, that we need to talk about? All right, good. So with that, I'll turn the time over to John.
Good evening, Mayor, Council, City Manager, John Lagarza, Healthy Sustainable Communities. Pleasure to be at this work session. Also with me is Matt Brinkley and Nikki Hart Brinkley. We'll be talking and presenting the plan here to you this evening. I'm going to just take a second here and make sure I can share my screen here. And can everyone see that?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, perfect. Well, again, thank you so much. This is an exciting project we've been working on here. The city started this work in the beginning of this year here, so great opportunity as we go through this tonight to tell you where everything's at here. As several of you are probably familiar with, up on the screen on the left-hand side, this is the original Lock Riel concept that was done approximately, just over 20 years ago there. And as we know to date, there hasn't been a lot of development that has taken place in this area here. And as the city continues to grow, there's an opportunity to really look at how this can be crafted and shaped into the community here in the future here. So again, not a lot of development occurred over the last 20 some years here. This was originally about 122 acres here. You see up here, the original concept was a slight area for commercial in there, some mixed use and some single family housing there. As your city manager brought out earlier, there was a lot of public outreach that was done in this process here. The city was very progressive in making sure that right away they stood up a technical advisory committee, and that really cast a large net over the people that represent your community, from people in the downtown area to real estate folks to nonprofit housing to community and economic development to transportation. So really, these folks worked with us as we met 5 times, helping to really shape and create the final concept that Matt will be talking about later tonight here. As we went through this process and as we got closer to a final concept, the city held a public open house back in August, which some of you probably attended there. It was very well received and large turnout from the community, great participation. We received 11 surveys as we went through this process right there. But overall, a fantastic job of getting awareness out to the community, having members of the community really provide their input to the plan here for where they see opportunities, brokers and people that are interested in looking at coming into Dallas and expanding there. One of the last things we'll wrap up tonight is that Nikki will show you again the Project Hub website that was built. This was utilized as we went through the TAC committee and with the open house, and to really bring awareness to folks that if they could not attend a open house or wanted to grab information on the site, all of the information that you'll see here tonight and more information from technical memorandum reports to surveys, there's all posted on the site here. So really creating awareness and interactive mapping system as we went through the process here. As you're probably real familiar, there's was 3 nodes primarily within the city of Dallas that have the Lock Riel node again is set, quite dormant for some time there. As we know, in the Barbary node, there has been a lot of development. We have public and merchant builders that are in there building, large residential movement there. just is starting to encroach up there to the north of the La Creole area there. The Wyatt Mode, we know there has been a little bit of work in there, but not as much as what's been happening in the Barbary Node there. So, but how do you connect to synergy? You'll see some synergy connection tonight, and how that will happen very slowly. So let's put it back here. So the original La Creole node was 60 tax lots with 40 different ownerships, about 122 acres. That was really expanded to take in where you can see in the green node there, the green dash lines down. That comes down through Hawthorne across to Ellendale there to really look at expanding that to the 222 acres and how that synergy happens within the Barbary node up into where across the Ellendale to the north there. Originally, you had some general commercial over to the west there, as you can see on the left-hand side of the picture up here. The city, a couple of years ago, commissioned with Eco Northwest, an EOA study, which really identified you have a shortfall of commercial land in your city here. So there's really an opportunity to mitigate some of that shortfall by working with the TAC committee and having people provide and help shape some of the ways that you can look at bringing in more commercial and residential development within this study area here. As we went through the project, you'll see if you go to the website or within the information here that we did definitely look at the existing topography. That's important, especially when you're looking at development, for your slope, your building elevations, how you're going to fit buildings in, how those contours and everything connects within to the future infrastructure and the buildability for future lands there. There was some environmental sensitive areas, if you can see, kind of right up by the Oakville area here, which you're all probably familiar with, but that has been planned and connected within the open space, working with the City Parks Department here too. As we're all probably aware of, the city's being very progressive in getting the sanitary sewer. The design work is underway for that on future, the main line coming up through Hawthorne that will service this node area. That's the main constraint right now, but the city's progressively working on that, and that will really help as we move forward with the potential concepts here that will help you with development in this area. Again, you'll see the transportation plan. The city was proactive in getting ODOT to the table, and during one of our TAC meetings and talking about how do we handle the Ellendale and future Kings Valley Highway, how that connectivity will connect and interact within the node there. So that's really progressive steps taken and having those early discussions there. You can see the proposed roads where Henkel on the south would come across there. Hawthorne would connect in through there. And again, these are proposed alignments that for the future transportation plan that would service this node area here. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Matt. Matt's going to take you through the concepts and the final concept plan here this evening too. So, Matt.
Okay, thank you very much, John. Can everybody hear me? Okay. Matt Brinkley, Greentop Planning Development Research, and thank you for the opportunity to be here tonight and to talk to you about the conceptual plans and preferred plan for the La Creole node. So as John mentioned, we looked at a lot of the existing conditions and as well as that EOA that was done by Eco Northwest a few years ago to kind of form these first three concepts that we developed. And out of those three concepts, we wound up with the fourth being the preferred alternative that I'll get into in just a minute. So one of the most important things that we were looking at was providing opportunities within the city's existing urban growth boundary to meet that need for commercial land that was identified in the economic opportunity analysis. And that EOA identified a need for about 95 acres of land. And so all of the concepts that I'm going to go through rather quickly get to that need, to different degrees, some a little bit less, some a little bit more, but they all address that need. They also address the need for future infrastructure. And what we're really talking about here, I'm sure as all of you know, is the need for sanitary sewer to come up Hawthorne and then through the node. And that seems to be one of the things that has really held development back in the node over the past 20 or so years. And it's great to see that the city is being proactive about that. But it also drives kind of how the node gets designed, because you probably want that sanitary sewer to be located in public right-of-ways or on some sort of public land where it can easily be accessed. So you can maintain your infrastructure over a long period of time, and your public works director doesn't get mad at you for putting that infrastructure through people's backyards. So that kind of drives where the streets go. But the transportation infrastructure, you'll probably notice, very similar to what you had before with the existing configuration of the node. And, that's basically an extension of Hawthorne coming up through the node, taking left, and then connecting into La Creel, and providing access all the way out to Kings Valley Highway and Polk Station Road. So those are the higher order streets. And then within that, you would have local streets, smaller streets that provide circulation throughout the area, as well as, drive aisles that go through commercial development, et cetera. So I'll get into the first concept. The first concept that you'll notice here has a large mixed use area kind of right off of Kings Valley Highway, and then right in the middle of the node. And right adjacent to that, about 7-acre public open space. That would be, a park of some kind. We didn't get down to that level of detail. That's something that we talked to Jennifer a little bit about. But it's something that you would sort of refine through parks and recreation planning. And I should note that all of the concepts have that central sort of open space area. And I'll talk a little bit about how that functions to tie other parks and recreation facilities together throughout this part of Dallas. But this has the least commercial designated land because it has so much of that mixed use. And the mixed use we talked about as being not necessarily vertical mixed use where you have ground floor retail and service commercial, but you might have horizontal mixed use where you have different kinds of uses mixed together in close proximity and connected by things like public plazas, as are contemplated currently in the Little Creel node plan, and just kind of bringing all of those uses together so that they work well together, like having mixed use right across the street from a public open space. There's some low density in this particular concept. Out around the edges is kind of a transition into the more rural land that's beyond your current UGB. That's typically EFU land. And so there's a kind of a transition that way. John, if you could go on to the next slide, please. Okay, so concept 2, here we reduced the mixed use a little bit in favor of more commercial. So you have more commercial that could meet sort of a regional kind of commercial need as well as a neighborhood commercial need, but kind of an emphasis on a regional commercial need. So that's commercial that serves the needs of, current residents of Dallas, as well as a larger trade area, because you're drawing from other parts of the county and even West Salem. So it favors that a little bit more, and it increases high density residential south of Ellendale going along Hawthorne. So you can kind of see that darker brown color there. And there's a little bit of low density that is continued, that's maintained in this concept. This concept kind of fell out when we were talking about it at the TAC. And so it sort of didn't make that initial cut. And we then moved on to, John, if you can, the next slide, concept 3. So concept 3 has quite a bit of commercial, a little bit of mixed use, gets rid of the low density residential altogether in this particular one in favor of high density and medium density residential all the way out to the edge of that UGB. The mixed use and the high density residential still are focused around that central open space feature that could be just kind of, an unstructured recreational opportunity like a park, with just open space, or it could be programmed. Again, that's something for the city and potentially developers to look at as you work together to fund the improvements that are necessary to make that happen. And so taking all of that into consideration, the TAC, working along with the TAC, we came up with concept number 4. And concept number 4, even with the large mixed use area that you see there on the south side of Ellendale, has a lot of land that's dedicated to commercial, whether it be regional commercial, it's mostly regional commercial, and some neighborhood commercial as well on the sort of southeast side. And then the mixed use moved to the south side of Ellendale based on an observation that one of the TAC members brought up, which I thought was pretty astute. And that is, if we want people to really use that mixed use area and have it serve existing development, because you have a lot of residential there to the south, to the southwest, to the southeast, to the east, you have the Barbary node, of course. So if you wanted to serve all of those residents and people who are coming into that area, then it might be best to have it on the south side of Ellendale so people aren't having to cross the street. And even with enhanced pedestrian crosswalks, we know that Ellendale will be a highly trafficked road. Hopefully the speed isn't going to be very fast, as it gets expanded at some point in the future to handle that additional need for capacity. But it's still, not going to be as friendly to pedestrians and bicyclists as having that mixed use area south of Ellendale. So people can easily walk and bike to it from existing development. There's a good balance of medium and high density residential here as well. There is no low density, so much so that I apparently repeated it on the slide twice. But that's the low density is gone. And again, this provides just about enough commercial land to meet the need that you have for commercial land within your existing UGB. So I think the EOA had 94, 95 acres that it identified as need for commercial land. And that's a whole bunch of different kind of stuff. That's office as well as retail and service commercial. But you can just about meet all of that right here in the La Creel node with concept 4. And I think that was one of the factors that was most persuasive to members of the TAC, as well as still incorporating some mixed use. And that mixed use would occur on land that's going to need a little time to transition, because as all of you know, right now, that's predominantly single family residences. Probably over time, those things will transition, and there are different tools that you can use to help facilitate that. But it'll take a little more time. The earlier opportunity is probably the commercial land that's on the north side of Ellendale. And with that, John, if you want to go to the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about the connections between all these areas. So again, talking to Parks and Rec about existing facilities, we wanted to make some recommendations for how all of that stuff could be connected together. And so we contemplate improved pedestrian as well as bicycle facilities on La Creel and on Hawthorne. Hawthorne obviously is, it's an unimproved road right now out in unincorporated Polk County. But as it comes into the city with the sanitary sewer project and water, other urban infrastructure, that right of way would be upgraded to something like what you see in the lower right-hand corner of the screen. So you have, sort of a minor collector with, 2 travel lanes, a shared left-hand turn lane potentially, and then on-road bicycle lanes, sidewalks, etc. Where that's not possible, you can use, or you may prefer to use off-road mixed use or multi-use paths, like you see in the lower right-hand corner. And that provides both for pedestrians and bicyclists. And that's something that we contemplate using through that mixed use node and then running north, crossing East Ellendale and going into the node, running all the way up to Kings Valley Highway, so that at some potential future crossing, it can make its way over to that residential neighborhood and then the park that's off to the northwest, thereby connecting schools that are down there further south on the Creel, as well as your parks and recreational facilities, the La Creel Trail, connecting that all together through the LaCreole nodes so that people are able to get around easily by walking, by bicycling, as well as by driving. So, and with that, I think I now turn it over to Nikki.
Hi, I'm Nikki Hart Brinkley with Green Top Planning, Development and Research. Thank you so much for having all of us. I have enjoyed exploring Dallas both in person and through the making of all of the maps that you've seen tonight. One of the fun things that I get to do, especially when we have, projects that long-range planning projects that involve a lot of different information, a lot of maps, a lot of data, and a lot of documents, is pulling everything together into what we call a hub, which is basically just a website that pulls in all of the information that you've seen here today and explores it in depth, and provides an opportunity for people to provide feedback, especially if they are not able to come to some of the public meetings. So what you see here is the LaCreole Node Master Plan Hub. And the first page here is a landing page that shows you just the overview of where we're at right now with the project, with that concept for zoning in place. It goes into the background about what the node is, why it was designed in the first place, and what the goals are of the project and why we're working on it now. It describes that initial area as John described earlier with the tax lots, 60 tax lots over 40 separate owners, and where we're at now with the 222 gross acres in the proposed area currently. I have made an interactive map where you can explore the entire area by scrolling around, zooming in, and getting information about the tax lots that are included in the current plan and a bit about their zoning and current use. I include here documents and links, including to the Economic and Community Development website, where you'll find more information, Dallas's comprehensive plan and map, things that happened in the news regarding the project, and timelines and contact information for city staff. On the second tab, we have the technical memorandum. And this was the memo that was developed with the TAC. And you can click on the technical memo here to get the full technical memo. Oh, and this site is down right now. So we will make sure that is, there we go. Okay. So this is the full technical memo, and you can read through that entire document here. So those of you who want to take some time and get to know exactly where we're at in the process can go to this technical memo and read at your leisure. Oops. Okay. Conceptual designs. So Matt went through the conceptual designs 1 through 4. Here again, we just explore where we're at in the conceptual design plan process, and we dive into the existing conditions and those draft conceptual designs 1, 2, 3, and 4. We also have a larger map of that connectivity map, so you can see exactly where your multi-use paths are throughout the city and how those interconnect in the proposed transportation plan. And finally, we have a little bit more about those existing conditions, the current node boundary, the proposed node boundary, how that node fits into the other nodes throughout the city, and a bit about your comprehensive plan and current zoning, as well as environmental conditions and that transportation system plan map that you saw earlier. So this is a site that is open to the public. You can navigate to it from the city of Dallas. And again, we provide a link so that residents who are unable to attend meetings can peruse the information, ask questions, and provide feedback. And that's all I have for you.
Thank you, Matt and Vicki. Thank you so much. And Mayor and Brian, we'll turn it back over to you guys.
Right. Thank you, John and team. So just a couple of notes. Larry Briggs, Councilor Briggs asked for this. What this shows is the proposed conceptual plan for including the Barberry node further to the east. So you'll see the green dashed line is the boundary between the Lock Rail node and the Barberry node, just to show how the proposed zones in the Lock Rail node match up with the Barberry node. And the consultants did a good job in working with TAC and making sure that that was consistent. Another quick note, in your packet, this plan here, the polygons are the correct concept plan number 4. However, there's 3 labels that are not right. And there are the 3 yellow polygons. One that are labeled low density residential, LD. Those are all actually medium density residential. So the boundaries are all correct. It was just the 3 need to be labeled medium density, not low density. So just kind of clarify those 2 things. We're certainly here to answer any questions that the council might have. Next steps moving forward are to, you're not approving or rejecting the plan tonight. You're just seeing kind of the work that's been going on. The next steps, we've applied for a technical assistance grant through the Department of Land Conservation and Development because, as you'll notice in the plan, we show a mixed use zone, but we currently don't have development code provisions for a mixed use zone. So we have to write that zone. And so we're applying for a grant to get a consultant to help us develop that code provision as part of the process. Once that's done, we will also work with that consultant to incorporate this planning effort into the city's comprehensive plan. So we'll also work on that. Through that comprehensive plan adoption process and some rezoning, that will go through the typical planning process, begin with the planning commission, a recommendation to the city council for adoption. So that's the time where you'll really incorporate all this work that the consultants and staff have done, the technical advisory committee, putting it into an official city document. So any questions?
Any questions of the council?
Is that website up and running now, or are
Yes.
It is. Is it on our?
There's a link to it from the Economic and Community Development webpage. So yeah, you can find it.
So are we maintaining the data that's coming in, or is the consultant?
The consultant is.
Could we go back to the page 1 and take a look at something real quick?
Sure. Do you want to look at the landing page for
The
the,
landing page, yeah.
so can you pull up the landing page and share
I thought
that?
it said council goals, or I'm just wondering what we might have said there if you clicked on that link. Oh, mayor outlines. Can we click on that? So does that need to be updated maybe?
Yeah, we can update that with the current address from Mayor Woods.
Good call, Larry.
Do we want to make that council outlines our goals, or is it mayor?
We can work with the consultant on getting the city council goals as part of your strategic plan, and then also the mayor's state of the city address.
That's actually a display for an article for the IO online.
Yeah, I think the IO also did an article with current Mayor Woods, and so we can update that.
And what does it say on press release? Does that need to be updated as well? No, that looks pretty current. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Carlos?
Is there any thoughts about traffic control devices or improvements of traffic control devices with a heavier load of traffic?
Yeah, so this is a concept plan. And so as you get further into development plans, development applications, The city is currently going through an update of our transportation system plan. We'll look at things like that. So certainly through the TSP update process, ODOT's going to be very interested in the Hawthorne connection and how that's going to function, so that, on the plan here, these assumptions to develop this were under the current TSP. The future TSP update may change some of the baseline assumptions and how this plan will actually be built on the ground.
Any other questions? Larry?
Do these zones line up in any way with current property boundaries, or is that impossible?
So most of the zones, we try to utilize current property boundaries for the zone line, as opposed to split zoning a piece of property. So that's where we try to do when we create zone boundaries.
Would we have in a situation where a property owner would have the boundary right down the middle, where they have medium density commercial on the same piece of property?
It's pretty rare when that happens, and I believe our development code speaks to when there is two zones on a property in which, Wayne, you're more of an expert on development code.
Yeah,
I think that the more
Yeah,
predominant zoning.
but ideally, we do want to follow the property lines. We can't, split zoning is complicated.
So we do try to follow.
We do.
Anything else?
Yeah, I'll say one thing. I appreciate the committee putting time and thought. Yes, I do. Isn't that a surprise?
Just-
That I have something
just
to say?
one?
Just one thing.
Okay.
I appreciate the committee putting time and thought into making sure we have bike paths and multi-use paths, and that this is a connected neighborhood that doesn't rely on cars. I appreciate that that's thought, and it was part of all 4 plans. So good job.
Okay.
Yep. And I'll add on to that just to thank the technical advisory committee staff did a wonderful job. Charlie working with consultants. The consultant team did a great effort on this. I've been to a lot of planning town halls or open houses in my day, in my profession, and I've never seen so many show up. For this one was great. We had, I think, over 90 people from the community come out, and none of them left, screaming or crying. And so I think it was just very informative and engaging, and Charlie, his team, and the consultants did a great job at that. So thank you.
Good job, Charlie.
Should acknowledge Nancy's being on.
Okay, we'll move on to item 3 then, general fund roadshow report.
Should we excuse our guests?
They are excused if you want, or you want to stay and watch?
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Everybody's watching.
Do you have your phone? Remember, we have to do the 2 things. Does it help that we're all staring at you while you're trying to type in your password?
That would bother him if we all left.
Like it when it makes you reset your password, and then it says it can't be the same as the old password. And you're
Probably no luck. No, it would say if your number.
I really don't want to know your password.
Do you have your email address
Debbie's
right?
right.
Check in.
my network does that all the time. They're making me reset it. I clearly got it right because it won't let you use my old
You're missing
password last week.
For work, I have to do the two.
You're gonna get locked out.
Nice.
Too many attempts.
Except from school.
Oh, you need to reset your phone password.
You might want to turn the microphone off.
Ours is a password and a fingerprint. It really gets me when it says it's not my finger, and I'm like, I brought my own fingers today.
I promise this is not.
I'll go ahead and not continue to type in my password for the benefit of the public entertainment.
And that's always when you're running late. It's never when you're early.
Yeah, right.
But hold on one second.
Okay. I'm gonna eat my sandwich while you do that.
It's okay. It's all right. Okay. My presentation was just simply to show the tables and graphs on the screens, but we have them here in the staff report, so it's fine. We'll just work from there. So thank you, Mayor and Council. Brian Lila, appreciate the opportunity to kind of wrap up the general fund road shows that we did. Thank you to all of you who participated in that, and to our senior staff members for their work in that. We did a lot of work over the summer, and that was, I think, really good. It was engaging for the community, and we learned a lot. So we're gonna go over that today. There's a recommendation to really just provide direction to staff on the next steps in the process on how you want to approach stabilizing the general fund. We did add an additional recommended solution. We'll talk about that in a little bit more detail later. But just to begin, in the background, the City Council has a strategic plan goal to address the general fund budget. We've been working out on that particular issue for a few years. Completing all the road shows that we did in the presentations over the summer. Table 1 on page 5 of the agenda packet just goes over those numbers, right? We did 30 presentations, 20 different venues, 202 people responded to the survey, and that's an average of 8 surveys per presentation. We had more people at the presentations and completed the surveys, but it was good to have them there. We advertised the presentations in the local newspaper on a couple different occasions, online, through social media, and in other city publications, including the city's newsletter and the city bill. The Friends of Dallas Aquatic Center also were very engaging in drawing community members out, and people that support their efforts showed up at many of the presentations. There were a few takeaways from the roadshow, and these came from comments that we heard during the roadshows, as well as comments that we received in comment cards. Just 5 main points. The first is that the city loves the services that we provide, the residents that are here, people that come to Dallas to participate in our services. They just love them. They think they're great, and they don't want to see them go away. They do recognize that the city needs to do something to sustain the general fund and to retain the services that we currently provide. They did say that each of the 3 revenue generating options that were proposed in the presentations were just too expensive. All of them were just too costly. They did say that whatever the city does do, it needs to be done over time, especially not like a levy. It all comes at once, right? And you pay the same amount each of those 5 years. But if you could build something in slowly over time, that would be much appreciated. And then lastly, a reduction in general fund services, which we called option 4, was just not acceptable. You saw that a lot in the public comments, which we included in this report. I think it's attachment D. So again, the summary of the roadshow options, options 1 through 4 that we presented. The first option was a 5-year operating levy at $1.90 of $1,000 of assessed value on each property. With that option, we would also remove the current $4.95 fee off the city bill. Option 2 was the Park and Recreation District. That tax rate is a permanent tax rate at $1.25 per thousand of assessed value. And with that option, we would also increase the public safety fee on the city bill from $4.95 to $10.50 a month. The third option was a 5-year operating levy at $1.30 per $1,000 of assessed value. Because that is less than option 1, you also had to increase the public safety fee on the city bill from $4.95 to $10.50 a month. And then the last option that we presented was reducing those city services, which was going to impact police, fire, EMS, aquatic center, park, and facility maintenance, library, economic, and community development departments. If you look at page 7 of the council packet, this is figure 1. These were the 4 options. We surveyed everyone that came and was willing to participate in the survey. The survey cards are included as attachment to this report, so you can see what that looks like if you don't remember from when you gave the presentations. And here's the breakdown. So option 1 received, again, with 202 total votes. Option 1, 29 votes. Option 2, 113 votes. Option 3, 43 votes. Option 4, 9 votes. And there were 8 people that said none of the options. So they just wrote a comment at the bottom, I don't want any of these. And so just percentages, 14% for option 1, 56% for option 2, 21% for option 3, 9% for option 4, or 5% for option 4, and 4% for none of the above. I will note that option 2 at face value is the clear winner, favored choice. It's the one that received the most favorable response. Option 1 and 3, the levy options, also received some favorable response, but neither of them performed overly great in the survey. And then option 4 and none of the above really kind of fell off, receiving very little support. Option 2 could be skewed a little bit for various reasons, particularly because the Friends of the Dallas Aquatic Center really drove a lot of their supporters to attend these road shows. And so you could draw a conclusion that if the Friends of the Dallas Aquatic Center and their supporters came to the presentations, completed the surveys, they would like to see parks and recreation amenities preserved. And option 2 was the most clear-cut, I think, choice for that, right? Creating the Parks and Rec District. It's its own funding source, it's standalone, and those services are then saved or preserved under that option. And so, but it's also important to recognize that if you do go out for a levy option or the creation of a district, you're going to have some supporters. And so it's good to see that you have a group of individuals that did drive people to be able to come to these roadshows and participate. So that's important to keep in mind as you look at the different options. So when we considered this, the survey results, the 4 different options, and also looked at the takeaway messages and themes that we heard throughout the presentations, we really felt that staff really felt and were concerned that any tax measure that you put on the ballot is going to face an uphill battle. And I think we all knew that going into this. Dallas has not passed a tax measure in a long time, and for various reasons. And I think any tax measure that you put in front of the voters today would be a hard lift for the community. So because of that and the feedback we received, we did create an alternative funding solution, and that starts on page 8. Yeah, page 8. And so what this alternative funding solution is to incrementally increase the public safety fee that we collect with the city bill. So you recall options 2 and 3 also increase the public safety fee on the bill. So this follows that pattern, but doesn't require a levy or the creation of a district. It's solely reliant on the increase of the fee. So when you look at table 2, in fiscal year 23-24, the current fee is $4.95. We would look to escalate that by $7.55 in 24-25 to a $12.50 fee, another $2.50 increase in 25-26, followed by 3 years of a $5 increase till 28-29, looking at a $30 maximum fee. Once you got to that point, staff would recommend applying a consumer price index to that fee so that you're able to keep up with inflation over time, so that you don't kind of get in the arrears again. The estimated revenues from the alternative solution have been put into the city's long-range forecast, which is attachment E. I would kind of direct you to go to that document. I'm going to tear it out of my plan because I want to talk from that and the notes here. So it looks like this. So with this forecast, a couple things to note. We did include, because we just finished the audit or at least we were able to get our audited numbers for fiscal year 22-23. Those are included on this document. So we included that into the forecast. I will say that we were working off of budgeted numbers when we created every column further to the right. So those were based off of the budgeted 22-23 numbers, but because we had the actual numbers, we put them in. A couple things to note in the actual numbers from 22-23 is that our revenues outperformed what we budgeted this last year, which is great news, right? And so what that means in terms of the alternative solution is that we were able to reduce and have a slower incremental walk up into the fee increases as opposed to putting larger fee increases in play right away. That's what the public asked us to do, and that's something that we can do with this option if you want to do that. As you look at the expenditures, well, let's still talk about the revenues. So what the budgeted 23-24 revenues and the forecasted revenues each year forward, they do not reflect the increased revenues that we saw this last year in 22-23. So what you may see, and what we're hopeful that we'll see, is that the revenues that are on this forecast will actually be higher than what we're showing here. Now, we don't know that, and you won't know that until you go through each year, right? For example, interest rates. This year, we received about $250,000 more in interest this last year, than what we budgeted. So as we budget in the future years, we're going to make sure that that number is a little bit higher, but interest rates could go back down, and we could lose that revenue. So it does vary from year to year. We also saw alcohol tax shared revenue from the state go up significantly this year, right? But maybe over the next few years, people decide to drink less, so we receive less of that revenue. So you just, we don't want to rely and assume that we're going to have higher revenues each year. But I just want to point out that we did not include in the forecasted revenues higher revenues based off of this last year's actuals. What that means, again, is with a fee increase, an incremental fee increase, we can look at each year's previous actuals and adjust our fee up and down, depending on, not up any more than what we're already proposing, because we're proposing kind of a worst case scenario, but you could ratchet that down depending on what you see in revenues from the previous year. Let me talk about expenditures. So we always assume worst case scenario that we're going to spend every dime that we budget. And so that's what you're seeing here. And so, for example, you'll notice that personnel services in actual 22-23 versus the budgeted 23-24, it's off roughly $1.8 million. That's because we saw just a little over $1 million in personnel savings over what we budgeted this last year. That's because we had positions that weren't filled. We had vacancies that became created throughout the year. They didn't get filled right away. And so just not having those positions filled in a timely manner or throughout the year, we realize revenue savings. And we calculate a portion of that, but we saw a lot more this year than what we expected or hoped, to be honest. So as you look at years moving forward, again, a forecast is our best guess. We assume certain things based off of our collective bargaining agreements. So we're budgeting between a 4 and 5% personnel services that includes fringe benefits and wages over the next 4 to 5 years. But this does not assume that we see any personnel savings in those lines. So you might look at it and think, wow, you're going to increase personnel from almost 9 million to 13.2. That's a big increase over 5 years, 25, 30%. The reality is it's not going to be that high. So again, having an annual look back at the previous fiscal year's actual numbers when you're setting your fee for each year, I think would be important to do if you move forward with an alternative funding solution as proposed in the report. A couple other notes on the forecast. The beginning fund balance in fiscal year 23-24 is $1.9 million larger than we budgeted. And that's, again, because of the actual revenues and the increased revenues that we saw and the not spending all of the money, the expenditure savings that we saw in 22-23. You'll also notice that revenues on this chart do not exceed expenditures until fiscal year 2028-29. So it gets all the way until we get to the last year where we actually start to see our revenues exceeding our expenditures. So we have a larger beginning fund balance now. Over the next few years, we're going to start to decrease that beginning fund balance until we get to a point where we start to see our revenues, at the $30 fee, you're going to see that go more than your expenditures. Again, depending on how expenditures and revenues play out, that could happen earlier, and we hope it does. And again, if we saw that, we could adjust the fees, the public safety fee accordingly to make that in a better alignment. The net decrease in the general fund balance decreases each year with the alternative funding proposal. The ending fund balance does dip below the 10% rule, the policy that you have in fiscal years 2026 through 2028. And so, but that's 3 or 4 years out still. So we'll be able to have a better idea on what that looks like on an annual basis. But even knowing if we dip slightly below for a year or 2 years, we know we're going to bounce back up as our revenues start to exceed the expenditures in future years. Projects in the general fund capital improvement plan have been extended beyond the 5-year plan. We now have an 8-year plan. We've moved some projects out. I'll highlight those near the end of my presentation and show you what projects we moved. And then, so if you recall, in the presentation, we were saying that our general fund capital improvements were between $1 and $1.3 million. We now have that down to about $700,000 in the first 2 years, and then $800,000, roughly, I think it's $750 in the first 2 fiscal years, and then $850,000 for the next 3. Yeah.
Ask you a question going back to the fees.
Yep.
When you say adjusting the fees, you mean if our budget, if we were on budget, projected to be on budget, you could actually not raise them as much. Is that what you're saying?
Right. So, for example, when I was working these numbers with our finance department earlier this month even, right? Before we got the audited numbers back, we were assuming that we were going to have to raise the public safety fee in February of this year from the $4.95 now up to $10, and then going from $10 to $15 in July. But what I'm showing you on page 8, I believe, of the report is that we don't actually increase the public safety fee until July of this year, and we reduce it from $15 down to $12.50. Again, because our revenues outperformed what we thought they were going to. And so as you go from each year, we'll be able to say, okay, here's where we are, here's what the fee needs to be.
But it can never go higher than your proposed.
Yeah, so I would say that we feel very confident that those are ceiling numbers, because again, we assume that we spend, all the money, and we typically don't do that. And so I would feel confident that if anything, we would be adjusting those numbers down from year to year as we look. So that's the hope.
And then what happens if we need to add police and fire personnel?
That's part of the conversation as well, and that's something to look at. I think that again, on an annual basis, you could say in that conversation of, hey, here's where we are, and you can say, hey, with this, we can keep the fee as we approved it, as the council approved it, and with that, you could add a police officer, or you could add a fire crew, or something of that nature, or if that doesn't make sense right now for the community and it's not needed, we could reduce the fee by a certain amount. So you can look at that again on an annual basis, and I think that's important to do. Larry, you had a question, then I'll go over to Carlos.
Back to the attachment E, the general fund spreadsheet.
Yep.
Almost all the revenue is flat or down except for other. And I'm just wondering, what is that other than the interest you mentioned on our ARPA funding? And then what's to say that we're going to have the $500,000 consistently all the way out to 28, 29? What's in that bucket, I guess, would make me feel a little more comfortable.
In the other line?
What's in the other bucket?
So Cecilia can probably answer this question better than I can off the top of my head. But you have your interest comes in off of the other
So as we spend that down.
Our conflagration money, when we go out and do fire calls, if we go down and respond to a fire in Southern Oregon or California or Washington, that money comes into the other account. Any miscellaneous revenues that we receive, so when the community hosts an event and we bring in revenue for that event, that money goes here. So there's always money going into that line. Because it's so variable from year to year, we put $500,000 in there because we feel safe with that number. But as you can see, the actual revenue from 22-23 was close to $3 million. I don't expect it to hit that every time. You had ARPA funding, I think that was included in that. But you have, we feel safe with $500,000. So it's almost a placeholder number that we feel safe we will achieve that number.
Isn't the can't say it right.
Conflagration.
Yeah, isn't that basically truing itself to cost? It's kind of replacing what we've spent on.
Yes.
So really netting zero.
You're netting zero, but you're also not, well, you make money on vehicles in particular, but personnel, you cover the cost of personnel, right? Yes.
Personnel's a wash. And
So personnel's a wash, vehicles, equipment, you make money on that. So, but even as a wash, right, it's still important to receive that reimbursement back to the city because we're spending that money up front.
Well, it's still additional funds.
Right.
I mean, even though we've already paid for the fire personnel out of our budget, we're getting additional funds for that personnel. So no, it's not a wash. I follow what you're trying to say.
Additional funds, so they're replacing the cost that we paid them and then some?
Technically. Am I correct, Cecilia?
Well, the conflagration, the personnel is pretty much back to zero. Because we pay overtime for conflagration plus benefits. And so that gets reimbursed dollar for dollar. So it's the equipment reimbursement that usually is.
But are we taking out dollar for dollar? Are we actually taking out money out of our budget to offset the actual personnel costs? Or is this money that they're paying us that would be the overtime and the normal wages for our firemen?
Yeah, so
Reimbursement, so it's additional.
So
Because if you look at the budget, I usually adjust it to increase personnel in the fire department if we have conflagration.
right, but we would still be spending the money no matter what for our personnel. So this money that we're getting for those employees going out is actually going to other as additional revenue.
right. So
it's not a wash.
You're receiving back there. I think you're kind of splitting hairs with this, right? Because you're spending money on your fire personnel, regardless of whether or not they go on a conflagration. Monthly salaries, right? Now, when they go on a conflagration, they're technically not working, in Dallas and serving the Dallas community, although we're paying them, and so we get reimbursed for the time that they're away from us, and we're
Are we covering them when they go away?
Yes.
So we're really.
Yes, and we get reimbursed for that as well. Okay. So we get reimbursed for the backfill. And so what Michael is saying is that that's money that we would have spent regardless. And so, but we're made whole with that money. And so it's extra in that it's as if we didn't spend the money on those employees for the time they were on conflagration. So it's extra in that regard, but it's because it's money that we would have spent, but we didn't end up spending because we got it reimbursed. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it's extra in that essence, but it's not, we're not getting paid above and beyond what we paid them when they were gone. Mm-hmm. In terms of the people. We do get money above and beyond for the vehicles because there's not revenue that those generate other than when they're on conflagration.
Okay. Carlos, you had a question?
Okay, just if you could help me understand, just so I understand what you're saying. At the end of the 22-23 fiscal year, we weren't as bad as we thought we were going to be.
Correct.
Okay, so what happens to the funds that are not used at the end of the fiscal year if you have extra funds?
So those become part of the ending fund balance for fiscal year 22-23, which then become part of the beginning fund balance in fiscal year 23-24. So you'll see that reflected on attachment E. You'll notice that the ending fund balance in the first column, 22-23, is $8,112,823. That ending fund balance becomes the beginning fund balance in fiscal year 23-24. So in column number 2. So any unspent money in the general fund just becomes beginning fund balance for general fund next year.
So, and do you have anything called emergency fund, or do we have something kind of like a rainy day
fund? So the only type of rainy day fund that we have outside of any reserve lines, so we have a couple of reserve lines in our budget. That's almost like future planning funds. We don't just have a rainy day pot of money. We do have a unappropriated fund balance, which is money that we don't budget. We don't appropriate it, so we can't spend it. That money is available and becomes part of your beginning fund balance the following year because you, as a council, say we are not appropriating this money. So we have a pot of money that we don't spend at all. We don't even have authority to spend it because you've not said that we can. So I would consider that part of your rainy day fund, right? Money that we have, we set aside and we say, we're not spending this money. In a dire emergency, if we needed it, we could come, we could appropriate it, we could spend it, right? So I would look at that as maybe a rainy day fund. Cecilia is probably screaming inside when I say that because you never want to touch that money. And we wouldn't touch that money unless there was an extreme emergency. But bridges were in the river. You had buildings that fell over. We needed to stand up, major things, and we had no other money. Then that's where we could dip into that. Outside of that, we would never use it.
Thank you.
Kirsten.
So I have two questions now. We got into talking about conflags. My understanding is that we're reimbursed for the use of our vehicles, not like, oh, it's a gift, but because they realize that we're using your vehicle and you're going, like, that's the use that you need to save that for when you need to replace the vehicle. It's not like yay fun money.
Yeah, so they give you a reimbursement for the use of the vehicle, right? Because you put wear and tear on it.
Yeah.
A great example is we took a truck down recently and we tore up the whole bottom of it, right? Driving through some stuff. So that had to be repaired. Great example. I don't think they gave us enough money to repair that, but it's going to get done. And so that's a great example of how that money would get used.
Yeah, so if we have that money and we're thinking of it as money that we can use elsewhere, we're going to find ourselves in a position where chief gets to come to us and say, I don't have a vehicle, or we're now having to use a 20-plus-year-old vehicle.
Yeah. So I would say that what we don't do is we don't take the conflagration money for vehicles and equipment and set it aside in a separate reserve line for the purpose of replacement and repair of those vehicles. We do make sure that as that becomes general fund funds that's flexible to be used on anything, we have in our fire and EMS budget, we have a total care program line, which is care of our fleet vehicles in the fire and EMS department. And we make sure that there's sufficient money there to maintain our fleet. So yes, that money is used in the general fund, and you could draw that straight line if you wanted to. It would be less than what we need to maintain the fleet, guaranteed. So you're safe to say that that money gets used for that purpose.
So my original question was, what has changed from when you guys put together this really great presentation that we all were trained on and went out and presented to our community that said, gosh, it's these 4 options or broke. Mm-hmm. What has changed? Because it hasn't been that much time.
Yep. So, and I guess your question is, why are we looking at option number 5 now, correct, an alternative option? Yeah, so 2 reasons. Number 1, the roadshow takeaways, right? You heard it, all of you heard it, right? Options 1, 2, and 3 are too expensive, right? We can't afford to take that on, especially all at once. And with a levy option or a new permanent rate, you're assuming that you're taking the bite of the apple all at once. You're eating the whole apple in one bite. And so that was concerning and made me and other staff members feel, and I think some of the counselors I spoke to, nervous about asking the citizens to take that large of a bite in a tax measure, whether it's a new permanent rate or a levy. And so, but we did hear that they want us to do something and they want to keep all their services. And so with that feedback, we said we need to figure out another way of approaching this that we can share with the council and say, here's something else you can do, which is taking smaller bites of that apple over time, right? You still have to eat the whole apple, but you're doing it in smaller chunks. And so the fee and incrementally increasing that allows you to do that, right? Take those smaller bites of the apple. It's also less expensive overall than the other options. And the reason for that is you have less properties that are taxed, so less taxpayers than you do fees that are paid by about 800. So you have, when you have more payers into the system, you can also reduce the amount you ask each payer to pay. And so the fee is overall less expensive. You'll see that on, if I can keep my pages straight here.
That's what my brain wasn't wrapping around. Thank you.
So you'll see that on page 9 of your report. I broke out each of the 4 options, 1, 2, and 3, and alternative solution. So that's, you're just paying less money overall under that option. The second reason why the things that have changed is that our revenues that we realized in 2022, 2023, again, were more than we anticipated. The revenues themselves were a little over $1 million more this last year than what we were forecasting or budgeting in years ahead. So again, we feel optimistic without being confident that that's going to continue in future years. And so we were able to even reduce down further what we were going to propose as far as a fee, incremental fee over time. So those are the 2 things that really changed.
Thank you. I read that piece. I just couldn't figure it out right now. Okay, thank you.
I think,
Brian, I have a quick question.
Mhm.
The beginning balance fund for each year, is that designed to be large enough so you can pay your bills for July, August, September, and October?
Yes.
Because you don't get any money from the county until November.
Right.
So that number is going to be big enough to pay that.
Yep. Yeah, and you recall our beginning fund balance, we try to have that be 10% of your general fund operating expenses less capital transfers and something else that's up in my mind. But anyways, and we maintain that until we get to fiscal year 26, 27. We dip a little bit below that, but again, noting that revenues might look a little bit different, we may be able to get there. So again, forecast is our best guess, and I think we've done a good job at putting a lot of work. This represents one sheet of a very complicated series of spreadsheets, and I didn't want to bore you or confuse you when I have all that information, but it's a good synthesis of all that information. So that's all on attachment E, unless there's any other questions on that.
Could we get other revenues broken down for us?
Yep. Yeah, I can share that with you. I'll send it in an email. So the last note I didn't have on my in the report is the public safety fee increases. We did include those. So we assumed the alternative solution in here. It's under charges for services. So you'll see that increases, right? So budgeted 23-24 is 2.975 million, goes up to 4.224 million, and then 4.583 million, then 5.208 million, 5.867 million, 6.561 million. So that assumes you adopt the fee structure as it's proposed. So we included that in there so you can see that. All right. Let's see, we went over table 3 on page 9. This is options 1 to all the revenue options. So options 1, 2, and 3 and the alternative solution. Again, this really shows the biting the whole apple at once or eating the whole apple in one bite or taking it slowly over time. Options 1, 2, and 3 are between $501 and $516, right? So that's the levy or the district options. Whereas in 24-25 for the alternative solution, you're going to be paying $150, right? And so then in 25-26, you're going to be paying $180. and then 240, and then 300 and 360. So again, the 5-year total, if you look at just a 5-year breakdown, options 1, 2, and 3, you're going to be paying around $2,500, close to $2,600 total. Under the alternative solution, a resident who pays a bill would pay $1,230. So again, less money overall. Again, getting to what we heard the public talk about. Option or table 4, lower down on page 9, shows the total revenue that you receive from those different options. Again, options 1, 2, and 3, we assumed we created those options before the revenue forecast. So these numbers could be ratcheted down slightly. So your asks that you'd be asking for would be a little bit less if we recalculated everything based off of the new revenues that we looked at in 22-23. But options 1, 2, and 3 were all 13.5 to close to $16 million for option 2, the Parks and Rec District. Alternative solution total 5-year total is $10.3 million. Michael.
Option 2 is not quite correct, I don't believe. That's a full amount of revenue that's now goes to a separate district.
That's correct. So option 2 is not revenue into the city. That's revenue into a district.
Which doesn't help stabilize our budget. Our general fund.
We remove the services to pay for parks maintenance, aquatic center, all that gets removed out of the budget. But this just shows how much revenue that option generates in terms of tax revenue. So that's not how much you offset in your budget for sure. But that was how much was needed according to that plan and study we did. So thank you for clarifying that. The last table I'll just go over are the processes required to implement the different funding options. So option 1 is the levy with no public safety fee. So this is on page 10 and page 11. So with that, if you wanted to implement that, you would do a levy that you would place on the May 21st, 2024 ballot. That requires the city council to do some actions in order to get that on the ballot with the county. You would have to approve the levy by the voters at that election. And then the council would take action to repeal the public safety fee ordinance. And I would recommend that ordinance take effect, if you choose this option, after the city begins collecting taxes on that levy in November of 2024. You don't want to have a gap where you stop collecting the fee revenue, but you haven't started collecting the replacement revenue in the levy. That makes sense. Any questions on the processes for option 1? Okay, option 2, the Parks and Recreation District and increasing the public safety fee. So the first thing you have to do if you choose option 2 is we must submit 2,750 valid signatures of registered electors in the district boundary by November 21st of this year. If you wanted to get it on the ballot for November of May of 24. So far we have a little, is it over 100 or over 200? It's under 200, more than 100, less than 200 total signatures thus far. Want to thank the mayor and council and the Friends of the Aquatic Center for going out and gathering signatures. There's a lot of lift yet to do. If you were to pick this option and you need to gather those signatures, staff would recommend hiring a consulting firm that would go out and gather those signatures for you. It's done all the time, so you could do that in order to meet the deadline of November 21st. The district formation petition would need to be placed on the May ballot. Again, the council would move in that direction. We've already got the preliminary petition filed with the county. We would just formalize that. The petition must be approved by the voters in May 21st of 2024. And then the council would take action to increase the public safety fee from $495 to $1050 a month and repeal the ordinance. Staff would recommend repealing the ordinance and doing a resolution again, so you can look at your revenues each year and decide, is that the fee we need? You can move it down if needed. Then on page 11, bottom of page 10, option 3 is the levy and increasing the public safety fee. So similar to option 1, you have to place the levy on the May 21st, 2024 ballot. Requires the city council to take some action on that. The levy must be approved by the voters. The council will take action to increase the public safety fee from $495 to $1050 per month. Again, recommending repeal of an ordinance and replacing that with a resolution. And then finally, alternative solution number 4 is the incremental increase in the public safety fee. The city council would simply take action to repeal the public safety fee ordinance and replace that with a resolution establishing the incremental public safety fee increases beginning in July of this next year. And again, you could, as a council, choose to look at that each year, consistent with your audited revenues to determine what that fee would be every subsequent year. And I, staff, would recommend doing that. So options 1, 2, and 3 require a vote of the people. It's less certain whether or not that would actually happen. Again, if that does not happen, the council has to take some action. Now, you could choose to just implement at that time alternative solution. So the last option there, or you could say, hey, we're going to reduce services. We're going to do a combination of those things. So you could look at that if you choose to do options 1, 2, or 3. If you did option 4, the last option, the alternative solution, doesn't require a vote of the people. But as counselors, you're elected to represent the people, and that's a decision that you have to make. You have to shoulder that, and there's responsibility and conversations that you have to have as part of that if that's something that you'd want to do. Again, staff recommend that alternative solution for the various reasons we talked about tonight. It's less expensive for the public overall. You can adjust as you go from year to year. I think there's value in doing that. It's certainty, right? Once you do that, you know that you can maintain the levels of services that you provide today, which again is something that you heard from the public. So I'll go ahead and stop there and answer questions.
Would there be any interest in a hybrid where we would implement an increase graduated $5 per year or two until we can, obviously getting it on the ballot's going to be the Parks District on the ballot, so probably not happen. But if we continue down that road, while we still increase the monthly fees, if it failed, we still have that in place to cover our expenses. If it did, then we would backtrack. Is that too convoluted?
No, so I think to just summarize what you're saying, at any time the council could choose to move forward with the option 2, the Parks and Rec District. I think that you're a little short on time. You have to spend some money to get it on the ballot as of today. So if you wanted to look at a district maybe 2 years down the road, you could implement the fee increases today, and then with the knowledge that you're going to put the district back on the ballot, you can do community engagement. You can talk about that and say, hey, here's what's coming, and then at that time put it on the ballot with the knowledge, again, the public, that if this fails, we have to then increase the fee again, which we will do. So you could certainly do that. You could also, if you don't want to do it as a district, you could say, hey, we're going to put out a levy. You could put out a levy in November and say, hey, if we don't do a levy, we're going to increase the fee, right? It's got to be one or the other, but we want you to choose. So you could do that. All the options are really on the table, and mix and matching them would be fine as well. Again, I think just being cognizant of what it would cost your taxpayer versus another option that's less expensive, I think you need to weigh that and thinking, yes, the public doesn't get a direct vote in that last option, but as their elected representatives, you're choosing the best and the cheapest option for them. So that's, again, stuff that you have to kind of weigh.
Any other questions?
Yeah, really quick. So it's called public safety fee, and right now when you refer to that, it talks about police and fire. Would it still all those funds, and then that would kind of offset and move stuff around in the budget, or how would that work if it's still called the public safety?
So that's one reason why I would repeal the ordinance and set it up as a resolution, because then when it comes in, it just comes into the general fund. I think calling it a public safety fee, you can call it whatever you want to call it, right? It's a general fund fee that's on the city bill that you collect with the city bill. I think it would resonate to call it the public safety fee, right? And you would certainly use those funds to pay for public safety personnel and their materials and services and equipment and other stuff like that. So I like the term public safety fee. As an ordinance, you call out it has to be kept in a separate fund. And so that's a little bit of a headache administratively, because it's its own fund, we have to make sure that that fund balances. The revenues come in, the expenditures go out. And so we're constantly shifting which personnel are getting paid out of that fund. And that's just, it's an administrative headache. if you didn't have it as a ordinance, but had it as a resolution, one, you're able to adjust it in a more timely and effective manner than you would as an ordinance, right? There's not a 30-day wait period and all that stuff. So you have a little bit more flexibility in timing of adjusting that fee. If your revenues came in stronger, right, you can ratchet that back a little bit. And then second, you're removing that administrative burden of having to constantly move, police officers and firefighters, the newest, youngest ones that, what I mean by youngest is the least amount of time in the city getting paid the least, into that fund so that you can make sure that you're supporting and balancing that. If you just had it into the general fund and into their departmental fund, it's smooth sailing.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I have a couple of things. One of the things that, well, a couple of things that I heard on the road shows, especially from the older generation of people, is when we got to option 4 of cutting services, to them, you have to tighten your belt. You might eliminate cable, you might not go out to eat as much, but to them, it sounded like, well, you're just eliminating rent and food. It's impossible to cut police and fire. I mean, that, to me, that's absurd, and that's what I heard over and over. And so, and I still have looked, I don't have a full picture of everything the city spends money on, but it seems to me those are like the highest priority things. And a lot of people felt, from their feedback, I thought a lot of people felt like it was a scare tactic. We have all these options, tax you. Otherwise, the world's gonna end. You're not gonna have police, you're not gonna have fire, your house is gonna burn down. This is how a lot of people have approached since. Another thing is even something as simple as the library being closed at the end of the week. One mother of 5 children, bless her heart, they're all under 8 years old, they go to the library every weekend. She said, well, why in the world would you cut Saturday? Why not make it a Tuesday? When, my husband's at work and we don't have time to take the kids to the library anyway. So I think, in almost, so those things aside, that's kind of what the feedback I got about option 4, that it was a scare tactic and they didn't appreciate it, which I understand. But with all of this, it was something this important and this amount of money and influencing people's lives for years to come and influencing their budgets for years to come. I would prefer to hear directly from the people. I don't feel like I've heard even a fraction. I mean, it almost seems like we have to have a public hearing about, do you want us to try to put this on the ballot, or do you want us to just, cut these things that we cannot possibly cut?
Yeah, those are all good points, and things that the council has to weigh in making your decision. I would say that option 4, it was not designed to be a scare tactic, but it was very scary. There's no way around that. The challenge is police and fire and EMS are the most expensive departments in the city budget, right? They make up well over 50% of the general fund alone in those 2 departments. And so there wasn't a way to reduce enough out of other departments in preserving them untouched without completely eliminating our finance department or our library, Parks and Recreation. You could eliminate, those services in their entirety and not provide that amenity, those services to the community anymore, and still have to make some cuts in police and fire. And so I understand the scary nature of it. It wasn't designed to say, hey, this is going to happen, but it was what was needed in order to make the balanced budget. On the library, we looked at Saturday because Saturday is not a full day of service, and we were able to eliminate the minimum amount of staff and still reduce a day. If we took a deeper cut and eliminated a different day that had more hours, we would actually lose more staff out of that. Not to say you couldn't do that, but that's why we chose Saturday versus another day. Less hours, less staff that needed to be cut.
But you see why their perception is, why would you pick the one day I have with my family?
Right, yeah, and that was
really,
the
as our population
rationale.
grows, and it is, quite obviously, that trend is not gonna change anytime soon. If anything, we're going to need more police and fire. and more services, but not more amenities. I would rather have no amenities that, I'd rather just walk and spend no money in the park than have, other amenities, but you cannot eliminate something that is absolutely necessary. It's going to be even more so.
Yeah, the problem is that you won't have a park to walk through because you wouldn't have people to maintain it, right? And that's the challenge. And so, yeah, it's tough. It's tough. I think that, as I'll put a little bit of a political science hat on, you're never going to reach every citizen, even in an election, right? And so, as counselors, you were elected in the republic democracy that we are to represent the people. You were engaged in the roadshows, right? You probably get more phone calls and emails about this topic than I do. And that's great, and you should, right? You need to hear from your constituents because you're representing them in this decision that you make. Staff are willing to go in whatever direction you tell us to go, and we'll do that. But you need to kind of weigh with the information we give you, and I think we've done a pretty good job at giving you the fair shake at what's out there, how you want to proceed. My recommendation, with what I heard, and I attended a lot of the road shows, is that we can't take that big. We want to do something, but what we want to do and what you're proposing is just too expensive to take that big of a bite of an apple all at once. We need to take it in smaller chunks. And so it got me thinking, how can we do that in a different way? Which is why that last option's on the table and recommended. It's a sure thing, right? It requires a vote of you. Once you make that vote, that's done. And then you're able to carry out what I heard from the people, which is keep our services the best you can. If you're gonna ding us slowly, and please less money overall, because that's expensive. So that's what this looks like.
Will the, if we go with the alternative solution, will that be a discussion at the budget committee?
So I would, and that'll be the last question, just so we have time to transition from this meeting to the other one. So you're not making a decision tonight.
No.
You're taking in this information. It would be a decision that you'll make before the budget committee process, I would hope. So I would, if you want to choose option 2, I would hope that you have some discussion and some direction for me between tonight's meeting and before our November meeting, so that we can pay to get consultants down here to get signatures. So if you're thinking option 2 is where we need to go, we need to do that right away, you need to let me know right away. If you're thinking, option 1, 3, or this alternative solution for funding, then that can be done, anytime between, I would say, now and the end of the year, right? To have council decide that.
Okay, thank you.
With that, Mayor, I think I'm done.
We'll adjourn